Is this thing on? How to avoid bad movies, part 2. In my last post, I explored the question of why critics so often lavishly praise totally lame movies, particularly artsy highbrow ones. I used a case study, the abysmal film Under the Skin, to showcase this unfortunate phenomenon. In this post, I'm going to warn you away from 4 more awful yet highly acclaimed movies to further examine how critics go wrong. Then I'm going to name for you, it was going to be 10, but I found an 11th, 11 critics who, being repeat offenders around this Emperor's New Movie syndrome, should be banned for life. I'll wrap up by listing 20 great movies that I've seen recently, just to finish on a high note. I know I promised that in my original post, but this time I mean it. All right, the first one I'm going to look at, A Summer's Tale. This was a US release in 2014, 91 Metascore. This French movie came out in 1996, but didn't reach the US until 2014. Only 3 critics gave it a perfect 100, but its Metascore is a shockingly high 91. It's tempting to call this movie science fiction because the plot is utterly fantastical and mind-bending. A goofy-looking young college grad spends his summer right after college at the beach waiting for his uncommonly hot girlfriend to join him. And while he's waiting, he hooks up with first one and then another highly attractive young woman, and he kind of 2 times both of them until his girlfriend arrives, at which point we have a bona fide love rectangle. And of course the women ask him to choose, but he can't or won't. He just kind of hovers like a little kid trying to choose his seized candy while we're impatiently waiting. The worst part, all the women put up with it. Are French women this self-loathing? In reality, there's nothing funny, charming, or exciting about the goings-on. It's just a tedious series of totally unrealistic non-confrontations. My wife and I didn't even make it to the end as our patience wore out. I kept hoping to be rewarded by something dramatic happening, like all 3 women turning on him, or his suddenly being retrieved by his overlord's spaceship. I can't fathom what anyone saw in this movie. I mean, the critics do try to explain, but the reviews are as meaningless as the movie. Most of these critics seem smitten in advance because the director, Eric Romer, is famous. Note the accent aigu over the E in his name. Well, you'd note that if you were on my blog. I'll bet the critics love that. So foreign, so sophisticated. Jonathan Kiefer in The Village Voice writes, "The Romer touch consists of nonchalance and effortless sensuality, not just in the people, but also in the landscape, somehow even in the air." Oh, how poetic. So we should see this movie because the air portrayed in it is nonchalant and sensual? Keith Ulrich in Time Out writes, "Romer has a genius for taking a seemingly mundane situation and slowly tightening the screws." Well, I agree with him on the mundane and slowly, anyway. Kenneth Turan in the Los Angeles Times says, "It may seem like nothing much is happening on screen, but by the time A Summer's Tale is all over, it feels like everything important has been said and done." Everything? What about the dumbass dude getting dissed? What about me being entertained? Stephen Ray for the Philadelphia Inquirer writes something eerily similar. "A Summer's Tale is one of those movies where it looks like nothing is happening." How can these guys agree on that damning characteristic of the film without agreeing that it's freaking boring? Every review listed on Metacritic is favorable, and they're all wrong. I think the main lesson here is to take gushing reviews of French movies with a grain of salt. After all, whoever said the French made good movies? Croissants, bicycle wheel rims, wine, sure, but movies? I've tried to remember a French movie I really loved, and all I could come up with was Diva from 1981. Part of why I loved it is that my dad took me to it, which was a rare treat. Yes, it was good, but I won't let my nostalgia impart too rosy a color. All right, if I really stretch, there was also Small Change, or L'Argent de Poche, which I saw on my 9th birthday, also with my dad, and which didn't measure up to my original delight when I eventually saw it as an adult. Noting that a critic for Time Out gave A Summer's Tale a perfect 100, I looked at their list of the top 100 French movies of all time. Here are my sub-1-sentence capsule reviews of the movies on this list that I've seen. Last Year at Marienbad. As I described in my last post, this was totally confusing, pointless, and dull. A Trip to the Moon. This is the famous movie of the cigar-like rocket stabbing the moon in the eye. So compared to the state of the art in movies of its era, i.e. nothing, It was, well, diverting, at least for a few minutes. Amélie. It's pretty forgettable, but pleasant enough. She's a little goofy looking, and as usual, there's a lot of accordion music. The Artist. Yeah, so it won an Oscar, and it didn't have any sound. That's all I remember about this pretty underwhelming movie. Belle de Jour. Boring, pointless, not nearly as sexy as it was apparently supposed to have been. La Vie en Rose. I'm pretty sure I saw this movie, but it didn't leave a dent. And The Class. It's pretentious, square. And these are the best of all time? Fine, Time Out is just one list, frankly, the only list I could find among English language websites, which tells you something right there. But if you find a better list, studded with movies I'd remember totally digging, well, let me know. By the way, I have nothing against foreign movies in general. Even a tiny country like Sweden does just fine. For example, Force Majeure and Let the Right One In are both great movies. All right, on to the next one. Her from 2013. This has a 90 Metascore. The idea of this movie is kind of neat. A guy falls in love with Samantha, the human-like operating system of his phone. This sets up an exploration of the foolishness in humans in conflating pretty interfaces with actual connection. The problem is the spectacle soon becomes pretty much unendurable because the milquetoasty main character, the aptly named Theodore, just doesn't know when to let go. Most of us have known a fool for love who embarrasses himself or herself by letting unrequited puppy love turn into an obsession, but we wouldn't pay to watch it on screen. Theodore, as played by Joaquin Phoenix, is particularly annoying because he's utterly shameless and a complete weenie. If you've seen Ghost World, you'll recall that Steve Buscemi did a great job portraying a fairly unattractive character you could reasonably believe might sink to pretty low levels of self-debasement when enthralled to a young attractive woman, but who nevertheless manages to hang on ultimately and show that he's got a fricking spine. No such luck with Phoenix. I eventually wanted his character to be put out of his misery, perhaps via frontal lobotomy. Which brings us to the ending. Spoiler alert. When Samantha starts hanging out with a bunch of other AIs and casually mentions to Theodore that she also communicates with thousands of other humans through their phones and is in fact in love with hundreds of them. Suddenly, Theodore's illusion of the fairy tale romance is shattered. I really loved this plot twist, but it wasn't enough to redeem the dull and painful stuff that came before it. There's a handy literary term for this effect, the imitative fallacy. As described, well, there's a link on my blog. This can occur when a novel is concerned with an unlikable or inaccessible protagonist, thus the narrative is also unlikable and inaccessible. Since the reader cannot figure out the protagonist, nor is the reader given any reason to care about the protagonist, the reader disengages. Obviously, this holds true for screenplays as well. And yet, Her received a whopping 19 perfect 100-point review ratings. I mean, come on, that many critics thought it was perfect? Please. At least one of these critics officially concedes that it's not perfect, but this is Bill Goodykuntz of the Arizona Republic, who calls it virtually perfect, so he's probably just trying to be clever. And the rest of his review is insufferably cloying. So these reviewers scoop to gushing, sentimental statements about the romantic authenticity of this human-AI relationship. Here's some quotes. Honest-to-goodness romance. It is a love story. The romance creeps up on you just as it does with Theodore. A heart-rending romance for all of us. A celebration of all that can be achieved between two like-minded souls. A deeply sincere romance. Are you kidding me? Look, I'm not trying to be some buzzkill anti-romantic sort, and I do believe in true love. Actually, that's precisely why I bristle at the suggestion that the relationship in Her could be legit. Such a notion devalues the full real connection possible between two humans. For all her sultry voice and clever utterances, Samantha has neither a body nor a soul. Okay, maybe you'll fight me on whether AI can have a soul, but there's no question it lacks a body. Do the critics really believe that the sensual, tactile aspects of love are unnecessary? Since when? A Star Trek episode from the 60s, the link to it is on my blog, already debunked this idea. It concerns life forms that are supposedly far too advanced to bother with bodies, and which instead occupy translucent orbs, but they jump at the chance to take over the bodies of the Enterprise crew and are thrilled to have flesh and bones again. At least not all critics loved her. Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle got it right, and I wish I'd read his review before wasting my time on this movie. He describes this movie as a lot more interesting to think about than to watch, and goes on to say, the story is too slender for its 2-hour running time, and the pace is lugubrious, as though everyone in front of and behind the camera were depressed. But the biggest obstacle is the protagonist, who is almost without definition. He is just some average guy of the future, totally bland, someone with no obstacle he needs to overcome, and no powerful desire he needs to satisfy. The moral of this story? Don't trust romantics. Remember, Romeo and Juliet was a tragedy. Where romantic movies are concerned, seek out the bad reviews and give them their due. Next film, Melancholia from 2011. This has an 80 Metascore. I'd forgotten all about this movie until I was combing through my Canopy viewing history and I didn't recognize the title. Only after reviewing the trailer did I remember it. Oh yeah, that tedious movie. It's about a woman who gets married and then starts wigging out, and then there's this planet on a collision course with Earth, which turns out to be a metaphor for depression, about as subtle as being whacked in the face with a bag of party ice. Instead of a massive explosion, which would have at least been stimulating, the ending slows to an absolute crawl. That is to say, even slower than the rest of the movie, which was slow enough already, with lots of slow motion, fanciful effects and over-dramatic music. I find it funny that this movie tried so hard to be moving and unforgettable, and yet I forgot everything about it, including the very fact of it, despite having watched it less than a year before. Now, this movie garnered lots of very favorable reviews, including 6 100s. As always, we need to take these Metascores with a planet-sized grain of salt. Perplexed by the 100-point rating ascribed to Anthony Lane's New Yorker review, I read the full text of that, which praises it sort of, but nowhere suggests it's perfect. Lane breezily describes Melancholia as depicting clumps of unlikable people behaving implausibly in confined spaces. He calls the start of the film quite a spectacle, and says its sights are wondrous to behold, and in their embodiment of Stygian souls, they leave the rest of the movie looking superfluous. He goes on to say, the middle of the film is an itchy and tremulous account of a wedding party at a Swedish country house in which the bride, Justine, Kirsten Dunst, keeps wandering off to take a bath or to have sex on the golf course with someone other than the groom, while maintaining frayed relations with her foul-tempered mother, her feckless father, and her anxiety-ridden sister, Claire, who looks nothing whatever like her. Fun for everyone. Does this strike you as the awestruck, fawning praise of somebody responding to a true masterpiece? Nah, I didn't think so either. So where did Metacritic get that perfect score of 100 that they claim Anthony Lane gave it? Beats me. Again, very few critics on Metacritic found fault with this film, but the Chronicle's LaSalle did. His review starts with what's praiseworthy, but then prepares us for the bad news. In doing so, he gives us a clue into why so many critics fawn over these excessively high-minded, ambitious, intelligent films. He writes, Melancholia's flaws are so typical and pedestrian that it's difficult to sound intelligent mentioning them. Fortunately, he proceeds anyway. But it must be said, Melancholia is grindingly slow and endless, with scenes that go nowhere and long stretches of directorial indulgence. There's almost no tension and barely enough story to carry it to feature length, much less 2.25 hours. What's that steady buzzing noise? It's the sound of other audience members snoring. Halfway through, you may wish the planet would come crashing into the wedding. Long before the end, you might wish the planet would come crashing through the theater. Perhaps what tripped up the critics was the pedigree of this movie. It was directed by Lars von Trier, the celebrated Swede. Look, everybody's fallible. I already listed a number of fairly lame French movies that critics loved, and consider the world-famous Italian director Federico Fellini. He created 8½, which was a complete train wreck. Perhaps American critics have a soft spot for foreign directors. Well, they shouldn't. On to the next film, There Will Be Blood from 2007. 93 Metascore on this one. There Will Be Blood looked grand and was quite gripping for a while, but the ending is a kind of what the fuck, hit the hyperspace button, totally out of place climax that kind of ruins everything that comes before it, which is a great shame since the movie had been trying for 2.5 hours to build something coherent. Instead, it simply detonated, as though Paul Anderson, the writer-director, just didn't know what to do and kind of panicked. David Denvey, who praised the movie excessively, with a review that the Metacritic listed as a perfect 100, acknowledges the flaw. He writes, "The movie becomes increasingly violent and comical. The movie becomes an increasingly violent and comical struggle in which each man humiliates the other, leading to the murderous final scene, which gushes as far over the top as one of Danielle's wells. The scene is a mistake, but I think I know why it happened. It is a blast of defiance, or perhaps of despair." Now, why should a flawed movie get 100 points from anybody? And Denvey doesn't even acknowledge the movie's other great flaw, the shrill, grating, overwrought score from Johnny Greenwood, the composer in the rock band Radiohead. I have nothing against Greenwood, by the way. I freaking love Radiohead. Bad music stretched over a movie this long does not make for a perfect movie. I wanted to like this movie, but I couldn't. Again, very few critics seem to have the balls to criticize this one, but LaSalle was up to the job. He too decries the dumb ending. He writes, "As was the case in Magnolia with its raining frogs, There Will Be Blood derails into grand gestures and deliberate perversity. The finish is not quite as bad as having Anderson pop out from behind the curtain to announce the previous 2 hours have been a joke, but it's close enough to rob There Will Be Blood of any impact, besides that which is focused on the director. A kind of, wow, can you believe he did that?" LaSalle concludes, "There should be no need to pretend There Will Be Blood is a masterpiece just because Anderson sincerely tried to make it one." The takeaway here, anytime a movie is super long, go ahead and read the negative reviews. Perhaps there's something intrinsically self-indulgent about asking for that much of our time, and those striving for something epic may be betraying a weakness for the grandiose. Second takeaway, if LaSalle dislikes a movie, trust him on it. He's batting 1,000 so far. All right, here's the punchline of this post. Blacklist these critics. I will freely acknowledge that I'm not a professional critic. Meanwhile, we all have our particular tastes, our turn-offs, and our guilty pleasures. I would never blacklist a critic on the basis of one or two indefensible missteps. After all, Anthony Lane liked Melancholia and Her, but I still mostly trust him. But when a critic has a long track record of gushing over totally lame movies, it's time to draw the line. Here are 11 critics who need to be banned for life for having at least 3 strikes against them. First, Bill Goodykuntz, Arizona Republic. He gave There Will Be Blood a 100, Her a 100, Melancholia a 90, and Under the Skin an 80. Repeat offender, loved 4 different totally stupid movies. Clearly he's an imposter, pretending to like movies that nobody could understand. Michael Phillips, Chicago Tribune, gave Under the Skin an 88, There Will Be Blood a 100, Her a 100, and Melancholia an 88. Once again, 4-time bullshitter. I'll never trust his reviews again. Ann Hornaday, The Washington Post, gave Under the Skin a 100, There Will Be Blood a 100, and even Her a 100. She hit the trifecta. On top of that, she gave Melancholia a 75. Peter Travers, Rolling Stone, gave There Will Be Blood a 100, Under the Skin an 88, Her an 88, and Melancholia an 88. On top of this, he gave the utterly dull Remains of the Day a 90 and called it one of the best films of the year. Cannot trust that guy. Lawrence Topman, the Charlotte Observer, gave Under the Skin an 83, There Will Be Blood a 75, and Her a 100. Andrew O'Haher, Salon, gave Under the Skin a 100, Melancholia 100, and Her a 90. Bill Goodykuntz. Wow, I got this guy in here twice. Arizona Republic gave There Will Be Blood a 100, Under the Skin an 80. You know, it only is 10. I just found an error in my blog. Who knew? Glenn Kenny, Premiere and RogerEbert.com gave There Will Be Blood a 100, Her an 88, and A Summer's Tale an 88. Kenneth Turin, Los Angeles Times, gave There Will Be Blood a 90, Her a 100, and A Summer's Tale a 90. Peter Rainier of the Christian Science Monitor gave Her a 100, There Will Be Blood a 91, and A Summer's Tale an 83. And finally, Stephen Ray of the Philadelphia Inquirer gave both There Will Be Blood and Under the Skin scores of 88, Her a 100, Melancholia an 88, and A Summer's Tale a 75. Amazing. He gave positive reviews to all 5 of my bad movie poster children. Never mind that the scores themselves were assigned by the obviously fallible Metacritic. These reviewers all praised one awful movie after another. Blacklist them all. I recommend you check out this on my blog, get this list, and then when you're trying to decide what movie to watch and you're spending half an hour doing it, you've already wasted enough of your time, and you see this movie that's got all these great Metascores, just make sure one of these 10 is not is not on there. And I'm going to finish off with some really great movies. Again, this is probably better consumed on my blog, but Tony Erdmann from 2016, Dunkirk from 2017, Miss Juneteenth 2020, Winter Sleep, also known as Kis Uikuzu from 2014, People, Places, Things from 2015, The Wedding Plan, aka Through the Wall or Lavor et Hakir 2016, The Farewell 2019, The Florida Project 2017, The Social Dilemma 2020, In the Loop 2009, Out of Sight, also known as Limerat Ain from 2006, don't confuse it with the George Clooney thing, Greta from 2018, Ex Machina from 2014, that's a lot better than Her if you're into the sci-fi. The Lobster from 2015 is great. The Housemaid, aka Hanyo from 2010, super good. Incredibles 2 from 2018. The Miseducation of Cameron Post from 2018, What We Do in the Shadows from 2014. That's a really nice double feature with Let the Right One In, the Swedish one. Spectre from 2015, if you like the Bond movies, that's a good one. And finally, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies from 2016. This is the rare case when Metascore is quite low, 45, but the movie is actually good, trust me. Thanks for watching.